The iron collar around Karsha's neck had rubbed her skin raw for 3 years, but the shame of it burned far deeper than any wound ever could. She stumbled through the mud of the frontier road, her wrists bound in front of her, attached to a chain that linked her to 4 other orc prisoners being marched toward the mining camps in the northern mountains. The human soldiers who led them showed no mercy, and she expected none. Her people had raided their settlements. Their people had slaughtered her clan. This was simply how the world worked, brutal and unforgiving, where orcs and humans killed each other and called it justice. The late autumn rain fell in sheets, turning the road into a river of filth. Karsha's feet, bare and bleeding, found purchase where they could. She was 23 summers old, her green skin mottled with bruises and scars, her small tusks chipped from the beating she had taken when she was first captured. The pointed tips of her ears were frostbitten from too many nights sleeping in cages open to the elements. She had been strong once, a warrior of the Stonefang clan, but 3 years of slavery had whittled her down to something that barely resembled the woman she had been. The orc in front of her, an elderly male named Grosh, collapsed into the mud. The chain jerked tight, pulling Karsha down with him. She hit the ground hard, tasting blood and dirt. "Get up!" The guard's voice cracked like a whip. When Grosh did not move quickly enough, the boot came down on his ribs. Once, twice, 3 times. Karsha tried to help him rise, her fingers slipping on his wet skin, but the guard struck her across the face with the back of his hand. "Don't touch him, greenskin filth." They left Grosh in the road. Simply unchained his corpse from the line and kept walking. Karsha looked back once and saw the old orc's body already half submerged in a puddle, his eyes still open to the weeping sky. She had known him only 3 days, but that was long enough to learn he had been a father of 6, captured during a raid while trying to defend his village from human mercenaries. That night, they made camp in a clearing that offered no shelter from the rain. The guards had tents. The orcs had the mud. Karsha huddled against a tree with the remaining 3 prisoners, trying to share what little warmth their bodies could provide. One of them, a young female barely past 18, wept quietly. Her name was Tiska, and she had been taken from her family just 2 weeks prior. "Stop crying," Karsha whispered, not unkindly. "It only makes them enjoy it more." "I want to go home," Tiska sobbed. "There is no home anymore," Karsha said flatly. "Not for us." She had learned that lesson when she watched her own village burn. The human army had come at dawn, soldiers in steel armor with the king's banner flying above them. They said the Stonefang clan had attacked a human settlement. They said it was retaliation. They said many things, but none of it mattered when the fires started and the screaming began. Karsha had fought. She had killed 3 soldiers before a mace struck the back of her head and the world went dark. When she woke, she was in chains, and she had been in chains ever since. The next morning, the guards found 2 of the prisoners dead from cold. Their bodies had simply given up during the night. That left only Karsha and Tiska, chained together, worth more alive than dead because the mines always needed workers, even if those workers rarely lasted more than a year in the dark. They walked for 2 more days. The rain never stopped. Karsha's thoughts grew foggy, her steps automatic. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing, on surviving the next hour. That was all life was now, a series of hours to be endured. On the 3rd day, they passed through a stretch of forest where the road narrowed to little more than a path. The guards were tired too, their attention wavering. That was when the bandits struck. They came from the trees like wolves, 6 men with scarves covering their faces and desperation in their movements. Not professional soldiers, just hungry men with rusty swords and nothing left to lose. The guards drew their weapons, shouting commands, forming a defensive line. In the chaos, Karsha saw her chance. She grabbed Tiska's arm and ran, pulling the younger orc into the underbrush. The chain between them rattled and caught on branches, but fear gave them speed. Behind them, men were screaming and dying, but Karsha did not look back. She ran deeper into the forest, branches lashing her face, her lungs burning with effort. They ran until the sounds of battle faded to nothing, until Karsha's legs buckled and she collapsed against a moss-covered boulder. Tiska fell beside her, gasping for air, her eyes wild with terror and hope in equal measure. "We escaped," Tiska breathed. "We actually escaped." Karsha looked at the iron collar around her neck, at the chain that still bound them together, at the vast forest stretching in every direction. They had no food, no tools, no idea where they were. Winter was coming and they were escaped prisoners in lands where orcs were hunted for sport. "Yes," Karsha said quietly, "we escaped." They walked for hours, following a stream because Karsha remembered her father teaching her that water always led somewhere. The forest was dense with pine and oak, the ground thick with fallen leaves that muffled their footsteps. Karsha's mind raced through possibilities, each more grim than the last. They needed to find food, shelter, and some way to remove these chains. Without those things, they would be dead in a matter of days. As dusk began to fall, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Karsha spotted smoke rising above the trees. Her heart hammered in her chest. Smoke meant people. People meant danger, but it also meant potential tools, supplies, maybe even a blacksmith's forge where they could break these cursed chains. "Stay here," Karsha whispered to Tiska. "I need to see what that is." "Do not leave me alone," Tiska pleaded, her fingers digging into Karsha's arm. Karsha wanted to argue, but she saw the terror in the young orc's eyes and relented. "Fine, but stay quiet and do exactly as I say." They crept through the underbrush until they reached the edge of a clearing. What Karsha saw made her breath catch. It was a small homestead, barely more than a cottage with a barn and a chicken coop, surrounded by fields that had been harvested for the season. Smoke rose from the chimney in a steady column. A single horse grazed in a paddock, and she could hear the distant sound of someone chopping wood. The sound came from behind the cottage. Karsha moved closer, using the tree line for cover until she could see him. A human man, tall and lean, with dark hair tied back from his face. He wore simple farmer's clothes and moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had split wood 1,000 times before. An axe. That was a tool they could use. Karsha weighed her options. They could try to sneak into the barn, steal what they needed, and disappear before he noticed. Or they could wait until nightfall and hope he fell asleep. Or she could do the unthinkable and ask for help. The thought was almost laughable. A human helping orcs. She had seen humans do many things to her people, but kindness was not among them. The man finished with the log he was splitting and set down his axe, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the chill in the air. He looked out over his fields with an expression Karsha could not quite read, something between satisfaction and loneliness, then turned and walked toward the cottage. "We should go in the barn," Tiska whispered. "Wait until dark." Karsha was about to agree when her stomach cramped violently, reminding her that she had not eaten in 2 days. Tiska was in even worse condition, her body trembling with exhaustion and hunger. If they did not get food soon, they would not have the strength to run if things went wrong. "Wait here," Karsha said again, and this time her tone left no room for argument. She stepped out of the forest and into the clearing, her hands raised to show she meant no immediate threat, though the chain hanging between her wrists told a story all its own. She walked slowly toward the cottage, her heart thundering so loud she was certain the whole world could hear it. The door opened before she reached it. The man stood in the doorway, and Karsha saw his hand move to the knife at his belt. His eyes widened at the sight of her, taking in her green skin, her tusks, her chains, the collar around her neck. "Please," Karsha said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She had not begged in 3 years, had sworn she never would again, but desperation made liars of everyone. "We need help." The man's expression hardened. "We." Karsha glanced back toward the forest, and after a moment, Tiska emerged, stumbling slightly, her fear evident in every line of her body. The man looked at them both, his hand still on his knife. Karsha waited for him to shout, to run for a weapon, to do what any human would do when faced with orcs. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from their faces to their chains to the raw wounds on their wrists and necks. "You are escaped prisoners," he said finally. It was not a question. "Yes," Karsha admitted. "There was no point in lying. If I help you, I could be hanged for harboring fugitives." "I know." "Why should I risk that?" Karsha had no answer that would satisfy him. She had nothing to offer, no leverage, no reason why this stranger should care whether she lived or died. So she told him the only truth she had left. "You should not," she said quietly. "We are nothing to you, but we are dying, and I am asking anyway." The man stared at her, and Karsha saw him struggle with something behind his eyes. She expected him to refuse. She had already accepted it. But then he stepped aside and gestured toward the interior of his cottage. "Get inside," he said, "before someone sees you." Karsha could not move for a moment, certain she had misheard. Tiska made a small sound of surprise beside her. "Quickly," the man said, urgency creeping into his voice. "The sun is setting, and travelers sometimes use this road." Karsha grabbed Tiska's hand and pulled her forward, stepping over the threshold into warmth and light. The cottage was small but well kept, with a fire burning in the hearth and the smell of bread baking in a clay oven. It was the most beautiful thing Karsha had seen in 3 years. The man closed the door behind them and threw the bolt. He turned to face them, and Karsha saw the wariness in his posture, the way he kept distance between them, his hand never far from his knife. "My name is Thomas Quillen," he said. "This is my land. Those chains need to come off before anything else." "You have tools?" Karsha asked. "I have a forge in the barn. I do my own metalwork when I need to." Thomas studied the iron collar around her neck, his jaw tightening. "That is going to be more difficult. I will need to be careful not to hurt you." The casual concern in his voice struck Karsha like a physical blow. She had forgotten that people could speak that way, as if her pain mattered, as if she were something more than property. Thomas led them to the barn, which was warm and smelled of hay and horse. He lit a lantern and examined their chains more closely, his fingers gentle when he touched the raw skin around Karsha's wrists. "How long have you been wearing these?" he asked. 3 years, Karsha said. His expression darkened, but he said nothing. He worked in silence, using a chisel and hammer to break the rivets on the chain that connected Karsha and Tiska. The sound of metal on metal rang through the barn, sharp and final. When the chain fell away, Karsha felt lighter, though the manacles still circled her wrists. Thomas worked on those next, his movements precise and careful. When the first manacle fell away, Karsha stared at her bare wrist, at the angry red ring of scar tissue, and felt something crack open inside her chest. He freed Tiska next, then stood and wiped his hands on his trousers. "The collars are going to take longer. I need you both to hold very still and trust that I will not slip." "Why are you doing this?" Karsha asked, the question bursting out of her before she could stop it. "You do not know us. We could be murderers. We could kill you the moment we are free." Thomas met her eyes steadily. "You could try," he said, "but I do not think you will. How can you be so certain? Because you asked for help instead of taking what you needed, because you are protecting her." He nodded toward Tiska. "And because I have seen what the king's justice looks like and I want no part of it." There was a story there, Karsha could tell, pain buried beneath his calm exterior. But she did not press. She simply nodded and tilted her head back, exposing her throat, showing trust she did not entirely feel but desperately wanted to. Thomas worked for nearly an hour on her collar, using a thin file to weaken the lock mechanism until it finally clicked open. The weight of the iron fell away, and Karsha gasped, as if she had been drowning and finally broke the surface. Her hand went to her throat, feeling bare skin for the first time in years, and she felt hot tears spill down her cheeks before she could stop them. She turned away quickly, ashamed of her weakness, but Thomas simply moved to Tiska and began working on her collar with the same patient care. When both orcs were finally free, standing in the barn with their chains lying in pieces on the ground, Thomas stepped back and studied them. "You are both half-starved," he observed. "When did you last eat?" "2 days ago," Karsha admitted. "Moldy bread. Come inside, I will make food." They followed him back to the cottage, and Karsha felt as if she were moving through a dream. Nothing about this made sense. Humans did not help orcs. They did not show kindness or mercy. They certainly did not invite them into their homes and offer them food, but Thomas did all of those things. He sat them by the fire and brought them bread still warm from the oven, hard cheese, dried apples, and cold water from his well. Karsha ate slowly, forcing herself not to devour everything at once, though her body screamed for her to do exactly that. Beside her, Tiska wept as she ate, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of warm food freely given. Thomas sat across from them, watching but not speaking, giving them space to recover. When they had finished eating, he finally spoke. "You cannot stay here," he said gently. "Not for long. If the guards come looking for escaped prisoners, this will be the first place they check. Every homestead, every farm, every village within a week's travel." "I know," Karsha said, though the words hurt. For a brief moment, she had allowed herself to imagine safety, but that was a fantasy. "We will leave at first light." "Where will you go?" "North, I think, to the mountains. There are orc clans there, beyond the human territories." "That is 2 weeks of travel through hostile lands in winter with no supplies." "I am aware." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against his knee. "I have a better idea," he said finally. "Stay in the barn for a few days. Let me give you proper supplies, clothes that will keep you warm, food for the journey. I can make you packs, give you a map. If you leave now, you will be dead before you reach the mountain pass." "Why would you do that?" Karsha asked again, needing to understand. Thomas looked into the fire, his expression distant. 5 years ago, I was a soldier in the king's army. I fought in the border wars, burned orc villages, killed warriors who were defending their homes. I told myself it was duty, that I was following orders, that your people were the enemy." He paused, his jaw working. "Then one night we raided a settlement. I saw a soldier run a pregnant orc woman through with his sword, laughing as he did it. I saw children dragged from their homes and put to the blade, and I realized that what we were doing was not war, it was murder." He fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging in the air between them. "I left the army the next morning," Thomas continued. "Walked away from my unit, from the king, from everything. Came out here to the frontier and built this homestead because I could not stomach another day of what we were doing." He looked at Karsha, and she saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "I cannot undo the things I have done. I cannot bring back the people I killed. But I can choose right now to help you, so that is what I am going to do." Karsha did not know what to say. She had spent 3 years hating humans with every fiber of her being, and now this man was offering her something she had never expected: genuine compassion born from genuine regret. "Thank you," she said finally, the words inadequate but honest. Thomas nodded. "Get some rest, both of you. I will make up bedding in the barn, somewhere warm and dry. Tomorrow we will figure out what you need for the journey." That night, Karsha lay on a bed of clean straw covered with wool blankets, staring up at the barn's ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened. Beside her, Tiska was already asleep, exhausted beyond measure. Karsha could hear Thomas moving around in the cottage, the soft sounds of a man preparing for bed, and she felt a strange sense of security she had not known in years. She touched her throat again, feeling the absence of the collar, and allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe the world was not entirely cruel. That maybe, somewhere in the darkness, there were still people capable of choosing kindness over hatred. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Thomas was true to his word, giving them shelter in the barn while he prepared supplies for their journey. But he also gave them something more valuable. He treated them like people. Each morning, he brought them breakfast and asked how they had slept. He offered them clean water to wash with and spare clothes from a trunk in his cottage, explaining that they had belonged to his younger brother who had died of fever 2 winters past. The clothes were too large on both Karsha and Tiska, but they were warm and clean, and that was more than enough. Thomas showed Karsha his small forge and taught her how to work the bellows, how to heat metal until it glowed the right shade of orange. He made her a knife, simple but sharp, with a handle wrapped in leather strips. "You will need a weapon," he said as he handed it to her. "The forests between here and the mountains are not safe." Karsha accepted the knife, weighing it in her hand. It was well balanced, a tool made by someone who understood his craft. "I do not know how to repay you for any of this," she said. "I am not asking for repayment. But you should. We are taking your food, your time, your resources." Thomas shrugged. "I have more than I need, and winter is coming. Better the food goes to you than spoils in my cellar." It was a lie, Karsha could tell. Thomas lived frugally, his supplies carefully rationed for the long winter ahead. Everything he gave them meant less for himself, but she did not call him on it. Instead, she simply nodded and tucked the knife into her belt. Tiska grew stronger with each passing day, her body responding to regular food and warmth. She helped Thomas with chores around the homestead, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, mending a tear in the barn roof where rain had been leaking through. She talked more too, sharing stories about her family, her village, the life she had lost. Karsha found herself growing quieter in contrast, watching Thomas with a wariness that gradually shifted into something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or confusion. She could not reconcile the man who fed his chickens and hummed while he worked with the soldier he claimed to have been. Could not square his gentle hands with the violence he said he had committed. On the 4th day, while they were working together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree, Karsha finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "How many of my people did you kill?" Thomas's hand stilled on the fence post. He was quiet for a long moment, and Karsha thought he might not answer. But then he did, his voice low and steady. 17, he said. "That I know of for certain, perhaps more in the larger battles where it was hard to tell who struck the killing blow." Karsha absorbed this, feeling the weight of those 17 lives pressing against her chest. "Do you remember their faces? Every single one." "Good," Karsha said harshly. "You should." "I know," Thomas agreed. He met her eyes without flinching, without making excuses. "I know." They worked in silence after that, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had acknowledged an ugly truth and chosen to continue anyway. That evening, as they sat around Thomas's table eating stew made from vegetables from his garden and dried meat from his stores, Tiska asked the question that had been on Karsha's mind as well. "What will you do after we leave?" Tiska said. "Will you not be lonely out here by yourself?" Thomas smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I am used to lonely." "That is not the same as being content with it," Karsha observed. "No," Thomas admitted, "but it is the life I chose. Solitude is the price I pay for walking away from who I was." "That seems like a harsh price," Tiska said softly. "It is lighter than the alternative." Karsha studied him across the table, this man who had given them everything and asked for nothing, who carried the weight of his past like stones in his pockets and never complained about the burden. Something shifted in her chest, a feeling she could not quite name, unfamiliar and unsettling. The next day, Thomas took them into the forest to teach them how to set snares for rabbits and identify which plants were safe to eat. He moved through the woods with the confidence of someone who knew the land intimately, pointing out landmarks and explaining how to navigate by the stars if they got lost. "You were a scout," Karsha realized. "In the army." "For a time," Thomas confirmed. "Before they promoted me to something I was less suited for." "What was that?" "Leading men." His expression grew dark. "Turns out I was not very good at ordering people to do things I found morally reprehensible." Karsha felt a reluctant respect for this admission. "Is that why you left?" "Part of it. The other part was realizing that if I stayed, I would either become the kind of man who could give those orders without flinching, or I would get myself killed refusing them. Neither option seemed appealing." They walked deeper into the forest, and Thomas showed them a cave hidden behind a waterfall, explaining that it would make good shelter if they got caught in a storm. He taught them how to start a fire without a flint, using a bow drill and dry tinder. He demonstrated how to filter murky water through layers of sand and charcoal to make it safer to drink. All of this knowledge, freely given, no strings attached. Karsha felt something inside her begin to thaw, ice that had been frozen solid for 3 years starting to melt. On the 6th day, Thomas presented them with packs he had sewn from canvas and leather, filled with supplies for their journey. Dried meat and hardtack, a waterskin each, rope, a small pot for cooking, fire-starting materials, the map he had promised, and a thick wool cloak for each of them. "This is too much," Karsha protested, overwhelmed by his generosity. "It is what you need to survive," Thomas said simply. "The journey north is hard even in good weather. In winter it will be brutal. Take what I am offering and use it well." Karsha looked at the supplies, at this man who had already given them so much, and felt a sudden fierce reluctance to leave. Here, in this small homestead on the edge of civilization, she had found something she thought was lost forever. A place where she was treated with dignity, where her existence was not a crime, where she could simply be, but she could not stay. The guards would come eventually, and when they did, Thomas would pay the price for his kindness if she was still here. "We will leave at dawn," Karsha said, forcing the words out. Thomas nodded, though something flickered across his face too quickly for her to read. "I will pack you some bread for the first day, fresh food while you have it." That night, Karsha could not sleep. She lay in the barn, listening to Tiska's soft breathing, and felt a restlessness that had nothing to do with the journey ahead. She rose quietly and stepped outside into the cold night air, and found Thomas sitting on the porch of his cottage, staring up at the stars. He looked over when he heard her approach but said nothing, simply moved over to make room for her to sit. Karsha settled beside him, their shoulders not quite touching, both of them looking up at the vast expanse of sky. "I have been thinking," Karsha said after a long silence, "about what you said, about not being able to undo the past. It is the truth, unfortunately." "Yes, but that is not the entire truth, is it? Because you may not be able to undo what you have done, but you can choose differently going forward. You can be someone new." Thomas glanced at her, surprised. "Is that what you think I am doing?" "I think it is what you are trying to do. I think it is what you have been doing for 5 years, out here alone, refusing to be the person the army wanted you to be." "And you?" Thomas asked quietly. "Who are you trying to be?" Karsha had to think about that. She had spent 3 years as a slave, and before that she had been a warrior, defined by her clan and her role in it. But all of that was gone now. The chains were broken, her clan was scattered or dead, and she was free to be whoever she chose. "I do not know yet," she admitted. "But I think maybe I want to be someone who does not hate so easily. Someone who can see that not all humans are monsters, just like not all orcs are savages." "That is a good start," Thomas said softly. They sat together in companionable silence, and Karsha became acutely aware of how close he was, the warmth of his body in the cold night air, the steady rhythm of his breathing. She found herself thinking about what it would be like to stay, to help him work this land, to build something here that was not defined by war or hatred or the sins of the past. But that was a fantasy, she reminded herself. A beautiful, impossible fantasy. "Thank you," Karsha said finally, turning to look at him. "For everything. For your kindness when you owed us nothing. For treating us like people when the rest of the world sees us as animals. For giving us a chance to reach safety." Thomas held her gaze, and in the starlight, she could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between duty and desire, between the safe choice and the reckless one. "I wish you did not have to go," he said quietly, and the admission hung between them like a confession. Karsha's breath caught. "Thomas, I know you cannot stay, but I wanted you to know that these past 6 days, having you here, having someone to talk to share meals with, it reminded me what it felt like to be alive instead of just existing." Karsha felt her heart hammering in her chest, felt the pull toward this man who had shown her what kindness looked like, who had given her back her humanity when she thought it was lost forever. It would be so easy to lean forward, to close the distance between them, to find out if this impossible thing growing between them was real or just the product of gratitude and loneliness. But before she could decide, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet night. Thomas was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the knife at his belt. Karsha rose more slowly, her heart sinking as she saw a torchlight through the trees moving toward the homestead. "The barn," Thomas said urgently. "Hide in the loft now." Karsha did not argue. She ran to the barn, scrambling up the ladder to the loft, and shook Tiska awake. The younger orc's eyes went wide with fear as she heard the horses approaching. "Stay quiet," Karsha whispered. "No matter what happens." They pressed themselves into the shadows of the loft, covering themselves with loose hay, and waited. Karsha could hear voices outside, harsh and demanding. Thomas's voice responding, calm and measured. The barn door swung open and torchlight flooded the space below. "I told you no one has come through here," Thomas was saying. "I have been alone for weeks. We will be the judge of that." The voice belonged to a soldier, arrogant and suspicious. "We are looking for 2 escaped orc prisoners, females, one older, one young. They were last seen fleeing into the forest 4 days ago." "I have seen no orcs," Thomas said firmly. Karsha heard the soldiers moving around below, poking at the straw, opening stalls. Her hand went to the knife Thomas had made her, gripping it tight. If they found her, she would fight. She would not go back to those chains. "What about the loft?" another soldier asked. Karsha's blood turned to ice. Beside her, Tiska had stopped breathing entirely. Just hay and some old equipment, Thomas said. I can show you if you like, but the ladder is not very stable. I have been meaning to fix it. There was a long, tense pause. Then the first soldier spoke again. No need. We have other homesteads to check before dawn. The relief Karsha felt was so intense it made her dizzy. She listened as the soldiers left, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the distance. She waited another 10 minutes before climbing down from the loft, Tiska following close behind. Thomas was standing in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. When he saw them, something in his expression cracked. "You need to leave," he said urgently. "Tonight. They will come back, maybe with more men, and next time they will search more thoroughly." Karsha knew he was right, but the thought of leaving now like this felt wrong. "Thomas, please," he interrupted, and there was real fear in his voice. "If they find you here, they will not just take you. They will hang me for treason. I am willing to risk that for you, but I would rather not die if we can avoid it." Karsha nodded, swallowing the protests that wanted to spill out. "We will go." They gathered their packs in frantic silence, strapping on the cloaks Thomas had made, securing their supplies. Thomas led them to the edge of his property, to a path that would take them north through the forest, away from the main roads. "Follow this path for 2 days," he said, handing Karsha the map. "It will take you to a river, cross it where I have marked, then head northwest. The mountains should be visible by then." "I will not forget this," Karsha said fiercely. "What you have done for us, I will not forget." Thomas reached out and touched her shoulder, a brief gesture of connection. "Be safe, both of you." Tiska hugged him impulsively, startling them both. "Thank you for being kind when you did not have to be." Then they were moving, disappearing into the forest, leaving Thomas standing alone in the darkness. Karsha looked back once and saw him watching them go, a solitary figure silhouetted against the light from his cottage, and she felt something tear inside her chest. They walked through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the homestead. Karsha pushed them hard, knowing that the soldiers would not give up easily, that every moment they delayed increased the risk not just to themselves but to Thomas. When dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they stopped to rest beside a stream. Tiska collapsed onto the ground, exhausted, but Karsha remained standing, looking back the way they had come. "You care about him," Tiska observed quietly. Karsha did not deny it. "He showed us mercy when he had every reason not to. That is worth caring about." "I think it is more than that." Maybe it was. Karsha did not have the energy to examine her feelings right now. She just knew that leaving Thomas behind felt like losing something precious before she even fully understood what it was. They continued north for 2 days, following Thomas's map. The path was rough, winding through dense forest and over rocky terrain, but it was clear enough that they did not get lost. On the morning of the 3rd day, they reached the river Thomas had marked, a wide, fast-flowing body of water that looked treacherous to cross. Karsha studied the map, trying to find the safe crossing point when Tiska grabbed her arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing downstream. Karsha followed her gaze and felt her stomach drop. Soldiers, at least a dozen of them, setting up camp on the far bank. They were searching the area systematically, clearly expecting the escaped prisoners to come this way. "We cannot cross here," Karsha said, thinking quickly. "We need to find another way." They moved upstream, staying well hidden in the tree line, searching for an alternative crossing. But the river only grew wider and faster the further they went, the current too strong to swim across safely. By nightfall, they were stuck. The soldiers were behind them, and to the east, the river blocked their path north, and they had no way forward. "What do we do?" Tiska asked, fear creeping into her voice. Karsha wished she had an answer. She studied the map again, hoping for inspiration, and her eyes fell on a marking she had not noticed before. A small note in Thomas's handwriting. Emergency shelter, 1 day west. West was the wrong direction. West led away from the mountains, back toward human settlements, but it was also the only option they had left. We go west, Karsha decided. We find this shelter and wait for the soldiers to move on. Then we try again. They walked through the night, exhaustion making every step a challenge. Karsha kept them moving by sheer force of will, knowing that stopping meant capture, and capture meant death or worse. Dawn found them standing before a small hunter's cabin, half hidden by overgrown vegetation. It was exactly where Thomas's map said it would be, a testament to his knowledge of these lands. The door was unlocked, and inside they found a dusty but dry space with a fireplace and a few basic supplies. Firewood, a flint, some old blankets. "We rest here for a day," Karsha said. "Let our bodies recover. Then we figure out our next move." Tiska nodded and immediately collapsed onto one of the blankets, asleep within moments. Karsha was exhausted too, but she forced herself to stay awake long enough to build a small fire and set up a basic alarm system using rope and some empty bottles she found in a corner. If anyone approached the cabin, the bottles would fall and wake them. Only then did she allow herself to sleep. She woke to the sound of bottles clattering. Karsha was on her feet instantly, knife in hand, heart pounding. Tiska scrambled up beside her, wide-eyed with terror. The door opened slowly and a figure stepped inside. For a moment, Karsha's mind could not process what she was seeing. Then recognition hit like a physical blow. Thomas stood in the doorway, travel-stained and exhausted, a pack on his back and his own knife in hand. He looked at them and relief flooded his face. "Thank the gods," he breathed. "I was not sure I would find you. What are you doing here?" Karsha demanded, confusion and anger and something dangerously close to hope warring inside her. Thomas set down his pack and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exhaustion. "After you left, I could not stop thinking about the map I gave you. I realized that the route I marked would take you straight to the river crossing, and if the soldiers had any sense at all, they would be watching it. I thought about you walking into that trap, and He trailed off, shaking his head. "I closed up the homestead and came after you. I have been tracking you for 2 days. You abandoned your home," Karsha said slowly, trying to understand. "Your land, your life, everything you built, for us." "Yes," Thomas said simply. "That is insane. You do not even know us. I know enough." Thomas met her eyes, and Karsha saw the truth there, raw and unguarded. "I know that you deserve a chance to be free. I know that I cannot go back to just existing after having you in my life, even for such a short time. And I know that if something happened to you because I sent you into danger with bad information, I would never forgive myself." Tiska looked between them, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I think I should check the perimeter," she said diplomatically. "Make sure no one followed him." She slipped outside before either of them could respond, leaving Karsha and Thomas alone in the cabin. "This is foolish," Karsha said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You had a life. You were safe." "I was alone," Thomas corrected. "There is a difference." He took a step closer and Karsha felt her breath catch. "These past 2 days walking away from you, it felt like the worst mistake I have ever made, and I have made some truly terrible mistakes. Thomas, we are from different worlds. I am an orc. You are human. Even if we got past the practical problems, even if we made it to safety, what kind of life could we have? Your people hate mine. My people have every reason to distrust yours." "I know," Thomas said. "I know all of that. But I also know that I would rather face an uncertain future with you than a certain one alone." Karsha felt tears burning behind her eyes, emotions she had kept locked away for years threatening to overwhelm her. "You are asking me to believe in something I have never seen work. You are asking me to have faith in an impossible thing." "I am asking you to take a chance," Thomas said softly. "The same way you took a chance when you stepped out of the forest and asked me for help. The same way I took a chance when I let you inside my home." He was right in front of her now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the scar on his chin from some long-ago battle. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I am terrified," Karsha admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "So am I," Thomas said, "but I think the things worth having are usually terrifying." Karsha made her decision. She closed the distance between them and kissed him, pouring 3 years of loneliness and pain and desperate hope into that single moment of connection. Thomas responded immediately, his arms coming around her, holding her like she was something precious, something worth crossing the wilderness to find. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Karsha rested her forehead against his. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "Undoubtedly," Thomas agreed. "We might not survive the journey to the mountains. Entirely possible. And even if we do, there is no guarantee the orc clans will accept a human, or that we will find a place where we can be together without persecution." "All true," Thomas said. Then he smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "But I would rather face all of that with you than face a safe, empty life without you." Karsha kissed him again, softer this time, a promise rather than a question. Tiska returned a few minutes later, grinning widely. "I see you two work things out." "We are complete fools," Karsha informed her. "The best kind of fools," Tiska said cheerfully. "So what is the plan now?" Thomas pulled out his own map, more detailed than the one he had given them before. "The river crossing is blocked, but there is another way. It is longer and more dangerous, but it will get us around the soldiers." "Show us," Karsha said. They spent the next hour planning their route, pooling their knowledge and resources. Thomas had brought more supplies, including a second knife, a hatchet, and a small amount of coin he had managed to save. With his tracking skills and knowledge of the land combined with Karsha's warrior training and Tiska's sharp eyes, they had a real chance of making it to safety. They left the cabin at dusk, moving carefully through the forest. Thomas led them on a winding path that took them well west of the river before curving back north. It added days to their journey, but it kept them away from the soldiers and the main roads. Over the following week, they fell into a rhythm. Thomas taught them more about surviving in the wilderness, how to read weather signs and find food in the winter forest. Karsha taught him some of the fighting techniques her clan had used, practical skills for defending against bandits or wild animals. Tiska kept their spirits up with stories and songs from her village, reminding them all of what they were fighting to preserve. The nights were hardest. They huddled together for warmth, and Karsha found herself gravitating toward Thomas, their hands finding each other in the darkness. They did not speak about what was growing between them, did not try to define it or examine it too closely. It simply was, undeniable and increasingly precious. On the 10th day after leaving the cabin, they crested a hill and saw the mountains rising before them, massive and snow-capped, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "We are close," Karsha said, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. 2 more days to the foothills, Thomas estimated. "Then we start climbing." They pressed on, driven by the nearness of their goal. But that afternoon their luck ran out. The patrol appeared without warning, 6 soldiers on horseback, emerging from a side path. Karsha and her companions froze, hands going to their weapons. "Well, well," the lead soldier said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. 2 escaped orc prisoners and a traitor. This is a better haul than we expected." Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the two orcs. "Let them go. I will surrender peacefully, but they have done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong except escape from the king's justice," the soldier said. "They are prisoners of the crown, and you are guilty of harboring fugitives. You will all be returning with us." "Run," Thomas said quietly to Karsha and Tiska, not taking his eyes off the soldiers. "I am not leaving you," Karsha said fiercely. "You have to, please." The soldiers were spreading out, surrounding them. Karsha calculated their chances and found them slim. 6 armed men on horseback against 3 people on foot, only 2 of whom had any real weapons. They could fight, but they would lose. Unless... Karsha's mind raced, remembering the terrain they had passed through earlier. There was a narrow ravine about a quarter-mile back, the only safe path between 2 steep cliffs. If they could make it there, the soldiers would be forced to dismount and fight on foot, evening the odds. "The ravine," she whispered to Thomas. "We run for the ravine." Understanding flashed in his eyes. He nodded slightly. "Now," Karsha shouted. They bolted, sprinting back down the path they had just traveled. The soldiers cursed and gave chase, but their horses struggled on the rough forest terrain. Karsha ran faster than she ever had, branches whipping her face, her lungs burning. Beside her, Thomas matched her pace, and Tiska kept up through sheer desperate determination. They reached the ravine with the soldiers close behind. Karsha turned, knife in hand, and faced the first soldier as he dismounted. He came at her with a sword, confident in his superior reach and training. But Karsha had spent 3 years learning how to survive against impossible odds. She ducked under his first swing, drove her knife into his thigh, and used his momentum to throw him over her shoulder and into the ravine wall. Thomas was fighting 2 soldiers at once, using his knife and a broken tree branch he had grabbed. He moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years in combat, anticipating their attacks and countering with brutal precision. Tiska had found a large rock and was hurling stones at a soldier trying to flank them, her aim surprisingly good. But there were still too many. Karsha felt a sword slice across her shoulder, hot pain blooming. She spun and kicked the soldier in the knee, hearing something crack, but another was already moving in to take his place. Then a horn sounded, loud and clear, echoing off the ravine walls. Everyone froze. From the northern end of the ravine, a group of orcs appeared, at least 20 of them, armed with axes and spears. They wore the markings of the Iron Peak clan, one of the mountain tribes. At their head was a massive orc warrior, his green skin covered in ritual scars, his tusks decorated with silver rings. "You fight on Iron Peak lands," he announced, his voice like thunder. "State your business." The soldiers looked at each other, calculating. They were outnumbered now and far from any support. "We are retrieving escaped prisoners," the lead soldier said, trying to sound authoritative. "By order of the king." "The king's orders mean nothing here," the orc warrior said flatly. "These lands belong to the clans. You will leave now, or you will die here." The soldiers were not stupid. They mounted their horses and retreated, casting dark looks back at Karsha and the others, but unwilling to fight a force that size. Karsha waited until they were out of sight before allowing her legs to give out. She sat down hard, her shoulder bleeding freely, adrenaline draining away to leave her shaking. The orc warrior approached, studying the 3 of them with sharp, intelligent eyes. His gaze lingered on Thomas, assessing and wary. "I am Karsha of the Stonefang clan," Karsha said, forcing herself to stand and speak with dignity despite her injuries. "Or I was before my clan was destroyed. This is Tiska, also of Stonefang, and this is Thomas Quillen, a human who saved our lives." The warrior nodded slowly. I am Grath, war leader of the Iron Peak. We heard there were escaped prisoners being hunted in these lands. We came to see if they were kin. His eyes moved to Thomas again. Why does a human travel with you? Because he chose to, Karsha said firmly. He helped us escape our chains, gave us supplies, and came after us when he thought we might be walking into danger. He risked everything for us when he owed us nothing. Grath considered this. That is unusual for a human. He is unusual in many ways, Karsha agreed. You are injured, Grath observed. Come. Our camp is not far. We will tend your wounds and hear your full story. They followed the Iron Peak warriors to a settlement nestled in the foothills, a collection of sturdy wooden structures protected by a palisade wall. It was nothing like the cities humans built, but it was organized and clearly thriving. A healer, an elderly orc woman with kind eyes, tended to Karsha's shoulder while Grath listened to their story. Karsha told him everything about her capture, her enslavement, her escape, and Thomas's unexpected kindness. She did not hide her growing feelings for the human, did not try to minimize what he had done or what he meant to her. When she finished, Grath was quiet for a long time, his expression thoughtful. This is a strange tale, he said finally. Humans and orcs do not usually choose to help one another. I know, Karsha said, but maybe that is because we have both been too stubborn to try. Grath's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. You sound like our shaman. She is always saying we need to look beyond old hatreds if we want to survive. Your shaman sounds wise. She is also my mother, so I am obligated to agree with you. Grath stood and looked at Thomas, who had been sitting quietly through the entire exchange. You understand that you are not welcome in most orc settlements. Your kind has done great harm to ours. I understand, Thomas said. I was part of that harm once. I am not proud of it. Yet you came here anyway, knowing you might be killed for what you are. I came because I could not let Karsha and Tiska face the dangers alone. Whatever happens to me now, that choice was worth it. Grath studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. The Iron Peak clan does not turn away those who seek refuge, regardless of their race, if they come in peace and prove their worth. You saved 2 of our kin from slavery. That earns you a place here, at least temporarily, while we decide what to do with you. Relief flooded through Karsha, so intense it made her dizzy. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Grath said. There are others in the clan who will not be happy about harboring a human. You will all need to prove that you can contribute, that you can be trusted. We will, Karsha promised. They were given a small dwelling at the edge of the settlement, a single room with a hearth and basic furnishings. It was simple, but after weeks of sleeping in the forest, it felt like luxury. That night, as Tiska slept in one corner, Karsha and Thomas sat together by the fire, shoulders touching, hands clasped. We made it, Thomas said softly. Against all odds, we actually made it. We did, Karsha agreed. Though I am not sure what happens now. Now we build a life, Thomas said. Here, or somewhere else if this does not work out. Together. Karsha turned to look at him. This man who had upended her entire understanding of the world, who had shown her that forgiveness was possible even after unforgivable things, that kindness could exist even in the darkest places. I love you, she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. I know it is fast, I know it is complicated, but it is true. I love you. Thomas's face broke into a smile of such pure joy that it transformed him entirely. I love you too. From the moment you stepped out of the forest and asked for help, I think some part of me knew you were going to change everything. They kissed again, tender and full of promise, and Karsha felt something settle inside her chest, a sense of rightness she had never expected to find. The following weeks were challenging. Karsha, Tiska, and Thomas worked hard to prove their worth to the Iron Peak clan. Karsha trained with the warriors, showing them techniques from her own clan and learning theirs in return. Tiska helped with the cooking and learned about the medicinal herbs that grew in the mountains. Thomas used his carpentry and blacksmithing skills to repair tools and improve the settlement's defenses. Slowly, grudgingly, the clan began to accept them. The warriors respected Karsha's skill. The elders appreciated Tiska's willingness to learn. And Thomas won people over with his quiet competence and genuine respect for orc culture. There were still those who distrusted the human, who muttered about old wounds and ancient grievances. But Grath's support, and the approval of his mother the shaman, went a long way towards smoothing their acceptance. One evening, about 2 months after their arrival, Grath invited Karsha and Thomas to share a meal with his family. They sat around a fire, eating roasted meat and root vegetables, and talked about the future. "The clan has decided you may stay permanently if you wish," Grath said. "All of you have proven yourselves valuable members of our community." Karsha felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "There is one condition," Grath continued, and Karsha's stomach tightened. "The two of you clearly care for each other. If you wish to remain together openly as partners, you will need to be bonded in the way of our people." Karsha looked at Thomas, saw the hope and nervousness in his eyes. "What does that involve?" "A ceremony before the clan," Grath explained. "You would speak vows to each other, pledge your lives and futures together. It is binding and sacred. Our people do not take such bonds lightly." "Marriage," Thomas said, understanding. He turned to Karsha. "What do you think?" Karsha thought about everything they had been through, the journey that had brought them from that first desperate night to this moment of possibility. She thought about the man who had freed her from chains, who had given up his entire life to follow her into danger, who had shown her that love could exist even across the deepest divides. "I think yes," she said, smiling through tears. "If you want to." Thomas laughed, the sound bright and unrestrained. "Want to? Karsha, I have wanted to ask you since the night we sat under the stars, but I was not sure it was possible. Yes, absolutely yes." The bonding ceremony took place 3 weeks later when the winter snows had just begun to fall. The entire clan gathered in the central square, 100 orcs watching as Karsha and Thomas stood before the shaman. Karsha wore a dress of soft leather decorated with beadwork, a gift from the clan's craftswomen. Thomas wore new clothes as well, sturdy and well-made, marking him as one of them. They stood facing each other, hands clasped, as the shaman spoke the ancient words of bonding. "In the presence of the clan, you come together to forge a bond that cannot be broken," the shaman intoned. "Karsha of Stonefang, do you take this human as your partner, to share in all things in times of plenty and in times of struggle?" "I do," Karsha said clearly, her voice carrying across the square. "Thomas Quillen, do you take this orc as your partner, to stand beside her against all challenges, to honor her and her people as your own?" "I do," Thomas said, his eyes never leaving Karsha's face. "Then, by the laws of the Iron Peak clan and the ancient ways of our people, I declare you bonded. May your union bring strength to you both and to the community you have joined." The clan erupted in cheers and celebration. Tiska was crying openly, beaming with joy. Grath clasped Thomas's shoulder in a gesture of acceptance and respect. Other clan members came forward with gifts and blessings, welcoming them fully into the tribe. That night, there was a feast with music and dancing. Karsha danced with Thomas under the stars, their movements awkward at first because they came from such different traditions, but eventually finding a rhythm that was uniquely theirs. Later, in the privacy of their dwelling, Thomas pulled Karsha close and whispered, "I never thought I would have this. A home, a family, someone to love who loves me back. Thank you for giving me a second chance." "You gave me a second chance first," Karsha reminded him. "When you freed me from those chains, you gave me back my life. Everything that has happened since then is because you chose kindness when you could have chosen hatred." "We chose kindness," Thomas corrected. "You could have killed me that first night, taken what you needed and run. But you asked for help instead. You gave me a chance to be better than I was." Karsha rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I think we saved each other. I think you are right." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the warm glow of their hearth. Two people from different worlds who had found a way to build something new together. The winter that followed was hard but happy. Karsha continued training with the warriors, earning a place as one of Grath's lieutenants. Thomas became the settlement's primary blacksmith, his skills much valued by the clan. They worked during the day and came home to each other at night, building a life defined not by the traumas of their pasts, but by the hope of their future. Tiska thrived as well, studying under the shaman and showing a natural talent for healing magic. She grew close to one of the younger warriors, a kind orc named Dresh, and Karsha watched with joy as her friend found her own path to happiness. In the spring, when the snows melted and the mountain passes opened again, a messenger arrived from one of the other clans. She brought news of movements in the human kingdoms, of armies gathering and old hostilities reigniting. War was coming, the messenger warned, and the clans would need to stand together. Grath called a council of the clan's leaders, and to Karsha's surprise, both she and Thomas were invited to attend. "You have unique knowledge," Grath explained. "Karsha knows how humans fight from her time in captivity. Thomas knows their tactics from his time as a soldier. If war is coming, we need that information." The council lasted for hours. Maps were spread out, strategies debated, alliances discussed. Karsha shared everything she had learned about human military organization. Thomas, with clear reluctance, explained the weaknesses in orc defensive tactics that he had exploited during his time in the king's army. "There is another option," Thomas said quietly, when the council was discussing whether to prepare for defense or launch preemptive strikes. "You could try to negotiate." The room fell silent. Several warriors looked at him as if he had grown a second head. "Negotiate with humans," one elder said scornfully. "They do not negotiate with us, they only understand force." "Some do," Thomas agreed, "but not all. There are people in the human lands who are tired of war, who want peace. If you could reach them, show them that orcs are not mindless savages, but people with families and homes worth protecting, you might find allies." "And how would we do that?" Grath asked, genuinely curious. Thomas looked at Karsha, and she saw the idea forming in his eyes before he spoke it. "Send an envoy, someone who can speak to both sides, who understands both cultures, someone who has lived in both worlds and can build a bridge between them." "You mean you and Karsha," Grath said slowly. "If you would trust us with it," Thomas said. "I know humans who might listen, merchants and farmers who live on the frontier and see orcs as neighbors rather than enemies. If we could convince even a few communities to seek peace rather than war, it might be enough to stop the larger conflict." It was a radical idea, dangerous and probably doomed to fail. But Karsha felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. What if it was possible? What if they could use their unique position to actually make a difference? The council debated long into the night. In the end, Grath's voice carried the day. "We will try Thomas's plan," he announced. "Karsha and Thomas will travel to the human settlements and attempt to negotiate peace. If they succeed, we avoid war. If they fail, we will be no worse off than we are now, and we will be ready to defend ourselves. And so, as spring turned to summer, Karsha and Thomas set out from the Iron Peak settlement with a mission that seemed impossible. They carried letters from Grath and the other clan leaders, offerings of trade and peace. They traveled first to the frontier farms, the isolated homesteads where humans and orcs had the most contact. The reception was mixed. Some farmers slammed doors in their faces or threatened them with weapons. But others listened, intrigued by the idea of trade with the mountain clans, of safe passage through orc lands, of an end to the raids and counter-raids that had plagued the frontier for generations. Slowly, painstakingly, they built a network of allies. A merchant who was willing to trade with the clans, a village elder who remembered a time before the wars and wanted peace for his grandchildren, a former soldier like Thomas who had grown disillusioned with endless violence. It took months of travel, of patient negotiation, of sharing their own story over and over to prove that humans and orcs could coexist. Karsha spoke about her time in slavery, about the cruelty she had endured, but also about the kindness Thomas had shown her. Thomas spoke about his service in the army, about the horrors he had witnessed and participated in, and about his journey toward redemption. Their story resonated. People saw in them proof that change was possible, that the old hatreds did not have to define the future. By the time autumn arrived, they had secured tentative peace agreements with a dozen frontier communities. It was not enough to stop a war if the king was determined to have one, but it was a start. More importantly, it was a foundation on which something larger could be built. They returned to the Iron Peak settlement as heroes, their mission a success beyond anyone's expectations. Grath greeted them with pride, and the clans celebrated their achievement with a feast that lasted 3 days. That night, lying in their bed with Thomas's arms around her, Karsha reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. From warrior to slave to fugitive to wife to peacemaker, she had been transformed in ways she could never have imagined. "You ever regret it?" she asked Thomas softly. "Giving up your old life, becoming part of the clan, tying yourself to me and all the complications that came with it." Thomas was quiet for a moment, and Karsha felt a flicker of anxiety. Then he spoke, his voice filled with certainty. "Not for a single moment," he said. "You taught me what it means to truly live, Karsha. Before I met you, I was just existing, hiding from my past, afraid to hope for anything better. You showed me that redemption is not about forgetting what you have done, but about choosing to do better going forward. You taught me that love is stronger than hatred, that bridges can be built across even the widest divides. How could I ever regret finding that?" Karsha turned in his arms to face him, seeing the truth shining in his eyes. "You did the same for me. I had forgotten what kindness looked like, what it meant to be treated with dignity and respect. You gave me back my humanity when I thought it was lost forever. You showed me what forgiveness truly means." "We saved each other," Thomas said, echoing her words from their bonding night. "We did," Karsha agreed. "And now we get to spend the rest of our lives building something beautiful from the broken pieces we both started with." They kissed, a promise and a celebration, and Karsha felt a completeness she had never known before. Her life had been defined by violence and loss for so long, but now it was defined by love, by hope, by the incredible man who had chosen to see her as a person rather than an enemy. The years that followed were not without challenges. The peace they had worked so hard to build was fragile, requiring constant maintenance and care. There were setbacks and failures, communities that broke their agreements, individuals who refused to let go of old hatreds. But there were victories too. Trade routes opened between the clans and human settlements. Mixed communities began to form in the borderlands, places where humans and orcs lived and worked side by side. Slowly, painfully, the old divisions began to heal. Karsha and Thomas became leaders in this new world they were building, their story inspiring others to take chances on peace. They traveled often, mediating disputes, negotiating treaties, sharing their experiences. They also built a family. 2 years after their bonding, Karsha gave birth to a daughter, a beautiful child with green-tinged skin and her father's eyes. They named her Isora, which meant bridge in the old orc tongue, and she became a living symbol of what was possible when people chose love over hatred. More children followed, each one a blessing, each one proof that the future could be different from the past. Karsha and Thomas raised them to honor both their heritages, to be proud of where they came from while building something new. On their 10th bonding anniversary, they stood together on a hill overlooking the Iron Peak settlement, watching the sun set over the mountains. Isora, now 8 years old, was playing with her younger siblings in the field below, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Do you remember that night you stepped out of the forest and asked me for help?" Thomas asked, his arm around Karsha's waist. "Every detail," Karsha said. "I was so afraid, so desperate. I thought you would turn me away or worse." "I almost did," Thomas admitted. "For about 2 seconds, fear and training told me to refuse, to protect myself. But then I looked at you, really looked, and I saw someone who needed help, someone who deserved a chance. And I realized that this was my opportunity to finally be the person I wanted to be instead of the person I had been." "You changed my life that night," Karsha said softly. "You changed mine too. You taught me what forgiveness truly means, not through words but through the way you chose to trust me despite every reason not to. You forgave me for being human, for being part of the culture that enslaved you, for carrying all that violence and hatred in my past. You looked past all of that and saw something worth loving. That is a gift I will never take for granted." Karsha leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play, thinking about the impossible journey that had brought them here. She thought about the chains that had bound her, the freedom Thomas had given her, and the forgiveness they had found together. "I did not think I was capable of forgiveness," she said. "After everything that was done to me, to my people, I thought my heart was too full of anger to ever let it go. But you showed me that forgiveness is not about forgetting or excusing what happened. It is about choosing not to let the past poison your future. It is about seeing people as they are now, not just as what they have done. And most importantly, it is about understanding that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moments. We both got that chance," Thomas said, "and we are spending every day trying to be worthy of it." Below them, Isora looked up and waved, her smile bright and joyful, completely unaware of the complex history that had made her existence possible. She saw only loving parents, a safe home, and a future full of possibilities. Karsha waved back, her heart full to bursting with love for this life she had built, for the family she had created, for the man beside her who had given her everything by asking for nothing. "I love you," she said, "not for the first time and not for the last." "I love you too," Thomas replied. "Always." They stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Two souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build a light that would guide others home. The orc girl who had learned what forgiveness was from a man who owed her nothing, and the human man who had learned what redemption meant from an orc who had every reason to hate him. Together, they had proven that love could bridge any divide, that kindness could overcome even the deepest wounds, and that forgiveness was not weakness but the strongest force in the world. Their story became legend among both their peoples, told around fires for generations to come, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always hope for those brave enough to reach for it. And they lived happily, fully, surrounded by the family and community they had built together, knowing that every day was a gift earned through courage, sustained by love, and made possible by the simple choice to forgive and be forgiven. Their happiness was not the absence of challenges but the triumph over them, not the erasure of the past, but the transformation of it into something beautiful and new. They had found in each other what they both needed most: a second chance, freely given and gratefully received, proving that sometimes the most profound gift one person can give another is simply the opportunity to begin again.